One of the most delightful feelings on earth is reading ancient books, contents of which are non-perishable and becoming only more valuable over time. One such book is Plato's Republic, that plants in the mind the seed of insight on the more intricate meaning of the symbolism of receiving of light, or the process of enlightenment. In this book, the famous allegory of the cave is described and has been called by some thinkers mankind's most principal archetypical parable. A lot can be said and discussed about Platonism and its vast impact on the history of human thought, but this essay, nevertheless, attempts to laconically communicate some of the symbolic connection of Platonism to the ideal of enlightenment, with their penetrating and enchanting resonance. Plato's cave became a classical archetype of enlightenment long before this word began to be associated with the 17th or 18th centuries period and the birth of modern sciences. It is evidently one of the most ancient narratives representing this ideal. Presented in Book 7 of the Republic, the allegory describes a group of people imprisoned in a cave since childhood. They are chained in such a way that they can only see the cave wall before them. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, objects are moved by others, casting shadows on the wall. The objects casting the shadows are varied and include vases as well as statues representing both animals and human figures. For the prisoners, these shadows constitute their entire reality, although the shadows are not even images of real objects, but mere images of images. Hearing the noises by the people walking behind, the prisoners attribute them to various images on the wall, discovering certain patterns. One day, a prisoner is freed and compelled to turn around. At first, he is blinded by the fire's light and struggles to comprehend the objects whose shadows he once believed to be reality. If led out of the cave into the sunlight right away, he initially suffers pain and confusion but gradually begins to see the world clearly. First the reflections of things in the water, then the objects themselves, and finally the sun, which he understands as the source of all light, life and truth. Returning to the cave to free others, the enlightened person is met with hostility. The others, still chained and accustomed to shadows, mock his arguments and resist the idea of leaving their familiar reality. What is this parable about? The answer seems obvious at first glance. It is a story about the fact that from childhood and throughout our lives we are prisoners of illusions and false certainties. Next, it is the story that one day a profound personal transformation must happen to us. Finally, this story tells us that as a result of this transformation, we will come to understand our purpose and realize our basic responsibilities to the world and to other human beings. This narrative of liberation, of healing, of approaching the true level of perception. It is described as coming out of the cave into the open world, being brought from darkness to light by releasing illusions and learning authentic reality and conscious action. We can distinctively now see that it inspired such plots as the Matrix movie trilogy, which demonstrates its archetypical power still to be alive in our age. Let us proceed then with the archaeology of timeless meanings and connect them to their lasting legacy. First, it is worth noting the significance of the cave itself. In Empedocle's religious poem Katarmoe, or Purifications, the powers which conduct the soul to its earthly incarnation say, "We have come into this roofed cavern." This leads to the clue that the image was likely taken from mysteries held in caves or dark chambers representing the underworld, through which the candidates for initiation were led to the revelation of sacred objects in a blaze of light. Most evidently among such might have been the Eleusinian mysteries, Pythagoreanism and alike. Second, the light in the parable clearly symbolizes knowledge. Early on, the fire, painful at the initial encounter, is what allows us to see the simulacrums, the shadows, the images of images. But as we ascend, the light of the sun allows us to see the actual objects. Here we must acknowledge that Plato's concept of enlightenment goes far beyond a mere empirical contemplation of tangible, immediately seen objects. The Platonic ideal consists of the elevation to the immediate, intelligible perception of that highest, supreme good, symbolized by the sun. We can see in this the significance of the path, the active process of searching for wisdom, of living it, rather than thinking it can be obtained once and for all. The sun guides us as long as we live and walk under it. The broader context of the Republic represents an inquiry aiming, among other things, to define and describe the character of a perfect philosopher king, who is most suitable to rule. Plato values harmony in a commonwealth, but as a precondition to such harmony must first be established in one's soul, same as we ought to bring our inner light to lighten the lives of others. Clearly, the philosopher king is a perfect ruler over himself in the first place. Most certainly, enlightenment starts in one's heart before it extends on our social life. The essay of Immanuel Kant, What is Enlightenment?, compares the enlightenment to mankind's maturity, ability to think for oneself, resembling Plato's ideas, that the guardian of the people in spiritual things should themselves be incompetent is an absurdity which amounts to the eternalization of absurdities. The philosophers of that of the enlightened man, duty is to bring others from darkness to light of the good, precisely as he was once delivered before. That ultimate good, represented by the sun, however, remains undefined in the strict sense in the Republic. Such good will definitely take more than one word to describe. In this inquiry, Plato only defined some core values, noble virtues, that were later expanded by Aristotle, his student. This include prudence, courage, temperance, and justice. The supreme good is nevertheless illustrated and explained to some extent by Plato, not in the sense of what it inherently is, but in the sense of what it should bring about. In the same way that the sun, as the greatest source of light, makes all the world before our eyes visible, so is the ultimate good that makes all other things intelligible to the mind. It is the highest form, eidos, that enhances our perception of everything else and allows us to learn the purpose of things. But if one stares directly at the sun, released from the cave unprepared, they may get blinded. Every individual can be a source of light to others if he directs his light elsewhere. The most benevolent application of the good is not selfishly absorbing its light alone, but using it to multiply this good, redirecting the light wherever there is darkness. The fact that the moral duty of the enlightened man in this parable is to return to the cave, readjust himself to its gloom, and strive to guide the prisoners toward the higher light signifies a symbolic parallel with our decency in social life as thoughtful individuals. It is worth stopping for a moment on the resemblance of the quality courage from Plato's dialogue, a milestone belonging to the genuine philosophic nature of one's character, that we must keep our hearts faithful to the values we have embraced, even when facing both worldly dangers, death, or pleasant temptations. Courage, then, is another quality which a community owes to a certain part of itself. And its being brave will mean that, in this part, it possesses the power of preserving, in all circumstances, a conviction about the sort of things that it is right to be afraid of. When I added in all circumstances, I mean preserving it always and never abandoning it, whether under the influence of pain or of pleasure, of desire or of fear. Republic, Book 4. The trials of tortured flesh are insignificant compared to the danger of losing one's soul, one's dignity, and the essential, life-bringing, virtuous inner beauty which stands in stark contrast to a treacherous ugliness. In the same way, Plato's ideal man, the philosopher king, is to rule over himself and pursue the highest good more reverently than any other aim, regardless of fears or dangers. Such a man is unfit for his role if he is consumed by cowardice or corrupted by greed. He cannot afford to waste his spirit on petty matters. And do you suppose that one who is high-minded and whose thought can contemplate all time and all existence will count this life of a man a matter of much concern? No, he could not. So for such a man death will have no terrors, none. A mean and cowardly nature, then, can have no part in the genuine pursuit of wisdom. The Republic, Book 6. At first, the former prisoner's encounter with the minor source of light, the fire, is painful for his eyes. If he values the comfort of the cave more than the truth, he will willingly surrender his freedom and abandon any attempts to escape, bound by his high standing among the other prisoners as an interpreter of shadows. Even if the released prisoner steps out and adapts to the fire's light, There is still a long journey ahead before he will have to endure comprehending the sun after abandoning his dark cage. It is remarkable that in English only one letter separates cave from cage. Failing to apply the highest type of knowledge, which is the knowledge of the good, will make us fall into the same trap that Faust is discovered by the reader at the beginning of Goethe's poem. Faust complains that he mastered all the principal fields. In his time it was theology, philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence. Yet he does not feel that he reached anything meaningful. Feeling alone, unworthy, and despaired, he even agrees to promise his soul to Mephistopheles, the spirit deceiver, if the former will manage to bring him a single moment of fulfillment. Thus, their fascinating journey begins, and the case of Faust exhibits our inherent vulnerability if we are disconnected from something so essential to life. To connect it back to Plato, we can recall that this poem has severe similarities with Dante's Divine Comedy, which, in its turn, bears the imprint of Platonism. The Pythagorean movement, however, left its mark on Plato's teaching. Pythagoras is said to have received his light from the Egyptian mysteries. In the following example, we can observe how Plato's impact lasted through centuries, including the Enlightenment period and the French Revolution. Even though this impact remains subtle, below the surface, it is not less evident. Danton, one of the leaders of the Revolution, associated himself with the great Roman orator Cicero, inspired by his speeches against tyranny and in favor of republican ideas. Cicero, in his political philosophy, clearly adapted some of the analogous ideas of Plato, in which the tyrant, or the despot, was the most miserable type of man, meaning not only the tyrant on the scale of the state, but also the despotic character, when a man is enslaved by his petty impulses and weaknesses. Notably, Plato failed to build his political career in Syracuse, a Sicilian polis, while Cicero had a great start of his career while serving as a quaestor in Sicily centuries later. And so, it is sufficient to conclude that anyone who takes the time to read Plato, a thinker whose influence looms so large that few others can match it, will undoubtedly uncover ideas that resonate with timeless, essential philosophical principles, such as the pursuit of wisdom and the sharing of knowledge. Thank you for listening. Discussions, reflections, and critique are welcome in the commentaries.